Good day, everyone. This is 2.1, Human Impact on Ecosystems. We just finished Chapter 1, so we're starting Chapter 2, discussing what an ecosystem is, different parts of the ecosystem, the roles that animals play in it. Now we're going to talk specifically about humans. That's what we are, at least most of us. Some of us might be something different at this point, who knows. The impact in general on the ecosystem, I think you can guess, is generally negative. But there's a lot of different reasons as to why that is. It's not, it wasn't always intentional. It wasn't we set out to ruin the environment. Sometimes things happen just because they happen. It is April 26th of 2020. The way I write my 2020 is really weird. I have to get better at that. This is grade 9 science, and if you don't know me by now, you'll never know. Learning goals for this lesson. So we're going to start by describing the impact humans have on various ecosystems, considering both direct and indirect interactions. The direct interactions, you probably name them off the top of your head, things like habitat destruction, overuse of resources, overhunting, stuff like that. But the indirect, you don't necessarily think about them until you really kind of put your head down and think. I don't know how else to phrase that. You're also going to define key terms associated with human impact on ecosystems. So key terms, again, they come up very content heavy, this unit, so keep that in mind. And finally, we're going to discuss the role of invasive species. Now, this is one of my favorite topics. I think invasive species are brilliant. Now, they're very negative to the environment. Some good can come from them, but the way they do what they do, and this kind of connects with the whole ethics and morality aspect. So let me just write that in here. Ethics/morality. Probably underneath the hand so you can't see it. But just keep that in mind when we start talking about the invasive species, because realistically, no animal knows it's doing harm, right? So we'll start by recalling what a sustainable ecosystem is. The whole concept of this unit of ecosystems in general is about sustainability and all the things we can do to kind of make sure we keep our ecosystem intact. Realistically, every day we wake up, every day we perform our daily actions, we're, for the most part, causing damage. We have to consider our ecological footprint, which is a topic we'll talk about later, but every person that lives on a day-to-day basis is causing some form of harm, whether it's polluting, using resources, or something like that. But many of us do positive as well, so we have to keep that in mind and try to focus more on the positives, like recycling, gardening, planting new species of trees or different types of plants in the ecosystem that we live in to kind of maintain the balance. Equilibrium comes up as well. We talked about that, so I'll just put that in here. Equilibrium. So an ecosystem that can maintain the needs of its inhabitants without depleting its resources. That's the most important part. Without depleting its resources. So if left alone, an analogy I often use with this, my father used to always own his own business, and realistically, if someone asked him, what's the difference between owning a business and being self-employed? The kind of quick answer is, if you own your own business, you can go on vacation for 2 to 3 months and everything will perform smoothly. If you're self-employed, you don't have that luxury, right? So a sustainable ecosystem runs like a business. If you're not there, it'll be okay. However, if you're self-employed, you need to be there monitoring it at all times to make sure everything's going right. So sustainability means leave it alone, it'll be fine. However, humans have a big impact on that. We have caused many ecosystems to become not sustainable. There's many reasons for this. So humans down here are not sustainable. The biggest and the most obvious is the destruction of habitats. So if we think about where we live, depending on how old your area is or how old your home is, years before you were there, there was an ecosystem. There was more than likely groups of animals living there. There was probably a lot of variety. We think back to our organization of life. So different populations, different communities, all interacting with the abiotic and biotic factors going on there. But we have come by, we said, we're going to take this place out, we're going to get rid of the habitat and build. Now, it's a natural part of life to say one organism will displace another. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But we're getting we're going a little too far with the destruction of the habitats. So we really need to keep in mind, we have to keep something there. And a lot of new developments, depending on where you are, might have a sort of man-made ravine or little stream or river within an area. And a lot of areas have natural parks associated with them, and they're protected. So keep in mind protection. So protected areas like the Canadian Shield, for example, or the Greenbelt, we can't build on those places. The government has said, no, we're going to leave that as is for the diversity of the ecosystem. Another thing we do is we overexploit resources and we overhunt, especially. Now, if you think back to native species or native individuals that lived on the earth before, the Europeans settled towards North America, they were very respectful of the land. They were very respectful of the creatures living on it, and they would only hunt in order to survive. They acted just like the animals around them. They acted with ethics and morality. There was no, I'm going to go out and hunt this animal just for the fun of hunting it. Every piece they would use, and it's quite frankly brilliant the way they use different parts of the animals. Now, over the years, we've gotten to the point where not only are we overhunting, we're just overexploiting the resources. So if you think about things like the amount of fresh water in an area, the lumber in an area, can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but there's many different resources that we have overused, and therefore there's just not enough left anymore. Another thing is that we pollute and we cause climate change. So climate change is a whole other topic on itself. I do have some videos on that you can look into, but the way that we're changing our climate, you can call it global warming, but there's a whole shift going on of what happens in what parts of the world and at what times. So for example, it's April right now, and I still get snow in my area. I think last year we had a huge ice storm, and you think, April is springtime, are we having ice storms? But every impact we have on the environment changes it, so we have to keep that in mind as well. Now, one thing I want to make clear is these are direct impacts. So these 3 points that I've made here that humans do. We literally go in and destroy habitats, okay? We literally go in and overexploit or overhunt, and we literally pollute. These are things we can stop. We can stop from happening. A couple more key terms to look at. I think I've got another page here. Now, color schemes is what they are. Habitat, home for invasive or native species. A native species is a species that has always been in an ecosystem or region for as long as we can remember. Okay? Genetic diversity. This is a very important point. So this is the uniqueness amongst species. The more diverse an area is, the better its chances for survival. Things like disease, for example. If a specific disease or virus is not necessarily attracted but feeds off of a certain type of species, if all of the species share that trait, for example, I don't know, if we had a disease that went after people with blue eyes, if every human on the earth had blue eyes, then we'd all die, and it would spread super quick. But we have diversity in that sense. So if an individual had that virus, an individual with brown eyes or gray eyes or hazel or green might be able to help them out, instead of having all the individuals with blue eyes just suddenly perish. It's the same for animals. So another easy one to think about is squirrels. We in Canada, or at least in Ontario, we have gray squirrels, we've got black squirrels, brown squirrels. I think I've seen a kind of like red tingy area or colored squirrel in certain areas. Anyways, depending on where these squirrels are, depending on where their habitat is, they blend in a bit better. So a squirrel in a forest, a brown squirrel will survive over a gray squirrel because a gray squirrel is going to kind of look out of place and hunters will be able to see it. It's the same with rabbits. So let me erase this. If we think about rabbits. Now, all the rabbits I see in my area are brown because, again, I live in a more foresty, earthy area. However, if you think about in the Arctic, did I spell Arctic right? No, Arctic. There you go. A brown rabbit in the Arctic is going to be consumed immediately because all the predators will be able to see it, which is why over there they are all white. The white rabbits survive. Okay? So getting into the more, negative's not the right word, but the key terms that aren't as positive. Extinction is something you've heard before. This is the death of a natural species. And when I say death of a natural species, it's not one or two of them, but all of the species. On Earth currently, it's a mind-blowing stat, but 99% of all the species that have ever lived have been extinct. So it is natural. It will happen. Humans will eventually be extinct one day. However, when you think about the causes, the biggest cause, humans have had the biggest impact in recent years. Okay? We, again, through overhunting, overexploiting, pollution, there's a concept known as bioamplification or bioaccumulation, which we'll talk about in another video, where our pollutants, especially in water, cause the pollutant factor becomes so much more concentrated because it's being consumed by different animals. But this is, again, a direct impact. So the overexploitation and overhunting, this is using a resource faster than it can be reproduced or replaced or kind of I don't know how else to phrase it, but a good analogy I have for this is if everyone who's at home right now suddenly went to the same supermarket and bought up all the toilet paper, which kind of was happening in recent days, there would be no toilet paper left for people. So if someone needed it in a moment and they went to the store, they say, sorry, we don't have any. You have to wait for it to be reproduced or replaced. And if we used up all the toilet paper in the world and we didn't have an ability to create it again for some reason, then it would be gone. Okay? Now, one thing in the past that we've seen is that we tend to overexploit and overhunt native species. So when humans come to an area, they see the animals in there and they go, oh, wow, the buffalo over there, that looks delicious. Maybe we'll kill them and eat them. Now, if you do that at a controlled pace, buffalo, the population can reproduce and it'll live indefinitely until they become extinct down the line. However, if you consume everything in an area, that area will be void of any of that life. The same has happened with our fish. If you continuously fish in an area, all the fish will die off and they won't be able to reproduce. Furs. The early settlers from Europe loved the fur that all the animals here had. So what did they do? They trapped them, they killed them, they used the fur. What happened was they overhunted, they overexploited that resource. So for the fur, they ended up killing off all the animals that were there. Finally, an invasive species, and I'm going to continue on to the next slide with this, but it's a species that is not native to an area. And you can think about how a species might get to an area. So one of two ways. It can be brought in by humans. Again, think back to European settlers. They often found plant life that they loved that was beautiful in different areas and brought it home. That plant life, it was in a new area, so it's now considered invasive. It can also take place, but natural migration. Natural migrate. Oh, sorry, I had naturally right there anyways. So they can naturally migrate because of human interactions as well. So what I mean by that is, if an area has been if you think about a habitat being taken over by humans, if we take away the habit of a species, what are they going to do? They're going to go, oh, well, I have no place to live now, I guess I'll just die. No, they're more than likely going to try to find a new place to live. Depending on how far they have to go, they could enter a new ecosystem and then become invasive because they're in a new place. So these 3 points here, we'll call these, let's see if I can put it on this side. Well, these are their success factors. I'll write that up there. Probably should have had that as a title. I can fix that afterwards. But invasive species are successful for 3 big reasons. First, they have no natural predators. So they come into an area and there's no creature, no animal, no nothing that wants to eat it, for example. That means they're going to overpopulate. If they overpopulate, that means whatever they consume is going to get reduced in numbers. That gives them more space, more land, they can reproduce even more. They also generally outcompete natural species. Okay, now natural species or a native species, those terms are interchangeable, right? But basically, they're either stronger, faster, smarter. They do whatever it is they do better than the natural species. Therefore, they get to consume the resources. It's like if you're in a race with someone who's faster than you and the prize is dinner for the day. Well, the person who's faster is going to win that race. Therefore, they're going to get the dinner, right? They can also reproduce faster than native species, or at least faster than their predators can take them out. So again, they tend to overpopulate. When they overpopulate, they need more food, so they consume more food, and again, more space, and this all eventually leads to a disruption in the ecosystem. So, for example, any type of weed or vine, generally speaking, is invasive. These plants specifically block out, and if you think about a dandelion, maybe I can draw a dandelion up here. So imagine grass. Grass is growing. This is your lawn. It's beautiful. You've maintained it. You've taken care of it. And now, out of the blue, what color should I make it? Make it maybe a darker green? Will that show up? That doesn't really show up. Let's make it yellow. All of a sudden, you've got a dandelion. They're beautiful. They're cute. We used to pick them and throw them at each other. But think about the leaves of a dandelion. How do they grow? They grow out. And they grow up. I've never seen a blue and yellow dandelion, I know. But this is going to block all the sunshine. So the sunlight's still getting over here and over here. But this grass here, no longer getting sun. And grass really likes sun, so if it doesn't get sun, it's going to die. Okay? They also tend to have really strong roots. Now, what color can I make the root? I guess I can make it green. So their roots, really strong, absorb all the water, whereas grass roots are just right there. So that's just one way that weeds specifically, like dandelions, are successful. Other vine plants. If you've ever seen a vine growing, vines tend to attach to what they're growing to. So my house used to be covered in vines, and they're beautiful. I love them. I actually have them inside of my house, decorating my walls. But they tend to strangle or choke out other plants because they press against them and prevent them from being able to get water through to their flowers. And that's how plants reproduce, their flowers. So if they can't reproduce, they'll eventually die out. A couple more examples. Zebra mussels. They were big in Ontario in the, I believe, early to mid 80s, and they were invasive, no natural predators, so they tended to clog up pipelines, which was pretty detrimental because if a pipeline's clogged, then whatever that pipe is carrying can't come to the people that need it. The cane toad. Cane toad was brought to, now this knowledge is escaping me, but I can think of the episode of The Simpsons where they brought it to Australia and it just started eating all of the crops in the area. And cane toads were actually poisonous, so any animal who ate it would die off as well. Different beetles, for example, the Asian longhorn beetle, it's invasive to many regions in our area because they consume trees and they just go from one tree to the next. So that's where the biodiversity comes into play. If you have a variety of different types of trees, maybe one that the Asian longhorn beetle doesn't want to consume, it won't consume it and it'll eventually die off. The absolute worst invasive species, though, would probably be humans. We go into an area, we pollute, we destroy, we consume, we don't replenish. That's not all of us, but it's how it used to be. We got to change it. So what? So why is any of this important? Okay, so big thing. Natural animals can become extinct. Boo-hoo, right? Who cares if animals are extinct? So what? This can disrupt food chains and food webs. Okay, it's becoming a little bit more serious, but still, so what? This impacts biodiversity. Okay, so what about that? This can lead to mass extinctions. Okay? Diseases can take place because of that. Lack of food, that's pretty serious. Reduced crop production. There are certain organisms in our soil that help break down dead material. We talked about those decomposers, right? If something killed off all the decomposers, we'd be surrounded by dead material, and that wouldn't be helpful to us. It would be actually detrimental because it's kind of toxic. All of these factors coincide with our survival. So we have to keep that in mind. Getting close to 20 minutes. We're at 18, so I'm going to stop it here. I really do like this gray highlighter. Never seen a gray highlighter in real life. Maybe I'll look for one. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.